say, especially if we're talking about silver, I mean, it has a lot of room to grow, as far as I can see, and that is me even phasing in how volatile it is. Whoever happens to win the election, a lot of the key problems or issues don't just go away.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. Hope everybody is doing well out there today. And another show as I'm excited to dig back into silver. Certainly we'll touch on the mining side a bit because today's guest, Andrew O'Donnell of the Market Mindset, in addition to following the commodities, is well versed in the silver and gold mining stocks, and especially with things such as the changing guard in Mexico and others. Plenty to dig in as we have a really strange situation that sits out there every day where we have the reported deficits, we've seen inventories come down, and get no real solution in place in the face of a green new agenda, that all of which we will dig into today with Andrew. And Andrew, great to have you back on here. It was nice to catch up to you. I was a guest on your show a couple of weeks ago, and now it's fun to turn the cameras and get the expert's opinion here. And anyway, thanks for making some time and joining me. And how are you today, sir?
Well, I mean, I learned a lot from you, Chris. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and always enjoy talking with you because we get to talk about a whole bunch of different things without getting too much in the weeds about specific companies, but just all the macro and all these kind of gaps and things that aren't kind of they're contradictory or not lining up, and it's very confusing. But at least it's extremely interesting. I always say, as dark as it gets, I say, well, what a time to be alive, because there's so much history happening like right now. And on that note, just let me just say before I turn over is, not condolences, but great sympathies for what happened over the weekend here. Absolutely atrocious and shocking. Unfortunately, there's two people lost their lives, I believe, but just it's horrible to see, and that's the stakes that we're dealing with nowadays. And it's going to affect the markets, of course, and like I said, history, it seems to be every month there's something that is just shocking and piled on top of piled. And that's being reflected, I think, maybe in the disconnect in a lot of things.
I certainly can understand what you're saying. It was a really shocking and, of course, sad day. Like you mentioned, there were a couple of people who lost their lives, and certainly just that we're in an environment where now, I get it, he's a divisive figure and people can have varying views, but that we're going to elections and things like that are happening is certainly alarming. And anyway, sending prayers out to everyone who was involved in that. And I guess just maybe one last note on that, it just continues to be stunning that someone was grazed on the ear with a bullet, just how close that came to something even more shocking to the nation. And
it is incredible to see. I could go on about it forever as well, but just literally watching that part where he just moves his head like he's looking to someone out there. And then, and I definitely don't want to get into it. People are like, oh, it was a setup. It's this and that. It's like, I don't care how good a shot would be. If you had an expert marksman to go, I'm going to time and just shoot and clip the person's ear while he's moving his head. It's like, come on now. Like it's literally like that far away from it being a terrible worst case scenario in which who knows how far things could have went in a bad way very quickly. And it's tough enough to have to deal with the reality of what happened there. But it just shows that, I put a lot of blame. I'm not on media. I mean, they've made him out to be someone he's not. Whether you like him or not, I don't care. But it's they attribute him to being some mass killer, and it's ridiculous. That's going to incite people that are not altogether there to do ridiculous and violent things. And I think the media has a good point to start toning down the rhetoric a lot.
I hear you. And certainly, as we'll tie into our first topic here, of course, we're amazingly a little over halfway through the year. So I'd love to get your opinion on both gold and silver. We saw quite a rally that began not at the beginning of the year when we were hearing talks of 7 or 8 rate cuts. that got delayed. We had the big rally. Now, as we will touch on, looks like we are getting closer to those rate cuts. But perhaps some thoughts on what we've seen, and then also what you might expect in the second half, which, again, tying back to Trump, the fact that it was already expected to be a lot of volatility in an uncertain election year. Obviously, that hasn't changed, especially just the number of unanswered questions of, similar with JFK, where there were so many things that don't seem to add up on the surface. So a lot of speculation. I imagine there will be people digging into this decades from now. And so anyway, where we've been for the first half of the year and the face of the things that are going on now, perhaps what you're watching as we go towards the second half of the year on Monday with a 24.39 gold price and $31.20 silver price there, Andrew.
Great. I mean, great commodity prices. That's why it's good to have a little mix of like actual commodity ownership as well as the miners. It's been, as most people will know, the junior mining sector is not doing well. One would have thought that it would be, but it's great to see that the prices they're up. I would argue they should be up higher. And I would say, especially if we're talking about silver, I mean, it has a lot of room to grow as far as I can see, and that is me even phasing in how volatile it is. Whoever happens to win the election, a lot of the key problems or issues don't just go away. So if you think that Trump comes in and everything turns around, there's a lot of work that has to get done, and there's major issues and structural problems that have to get fixed. So it's not a good story, but following like the economy and whatnot. But if you are looking, if you're holding, precious metals and a good kind of portfolio, there's still a lot of room here. And that's without even touching on the solar panels, the green agenda, all that other stuff. Just on a fiscal kind of level, I think you're a very safe bet regardless of who wins the election moving forward. And now I don't want to go out and put like huge price targets out there because that's always a dangerous game to play. But I would say I am not at all concerned about owning more and buying more.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, that makes a lot of sense. Where, is there a spike in the metals? Does something happen with the debt? Is there a restructure? Are the BRICS moving something forward? You have a whole range of outcomes, although sometimes I like to think of it in terms of you're stacking a couple different probabilities, because at the end of the day, it's hard for me to see an environment where, I mean, even the Fed's not claiming that we're going to have prices lower. It's really a degree of how much inflation we're going to have over 10 to 20 years. And I mean, and perhaps we could get your comment on how we've seen the cost rising for the miners. So fortunately, now with the rally we saw in the first half, that's helped bring back some margin. Yet I saw a study that showed some of the break even for some of the silver miners, they were struggling around $25.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm guessing 10 or 20 years from now, what is that cost of production going to be? Is that going to be 30 or 40? Could we see, is what's become your $20 hamburger in most major cities now, is that going to be a $30 or $40 hamburger? So you have that supporting the base level of the gold and silver fundamentals, then let alone whatever the Fed does. If there is an issue with the debt, and I mean, in either case, it's hard to see an environment where we're seeing significantly lower metals prices 10 or 20 years from now.
No, I mean, just off of the whole battery energy story, how much stuff we need, I think eventually the world has to come to a point of realizing that kind of chain of custody, or wherever you get the metal, it's going to matter. Also, how you transport the ore is going to matter. If you have to truck it from Indonesia to somewhere else, or from Canada over to China to get processed and then send it back, that's going to cost a lot more. So, my argument is the NIMBY crowd in North America has to get over it and say we have to start mining here. But even with that, like you're saying, a good price in the metals for well, not all, but some. The cost of doing anything right now is staggering. So if you are a new discovery, you go, oh, great, it's great timing. We've got a new discovery. You go, how much is that mine going to cost? And you're going to try to project costs out like 10 years out from now as well. Because as you know, just because you have a discovery and it's even like a big enough one where you're going to make a mine, you're at 10 years at least, to get that thing going. So there's a lot of issues, and that's where that kind of things aren't sinking in properly, where you go, are we doing this agenda thing? Like, are we doing this push? Are we really going for all these metals? Because we don't have enough. And if we are, how come there isn't a massive flurry of these, what do you call it? Inflation Reduction Act dollars being thrown at this to try to get this problem solved? Why isn't there? And this kind of brings in that idea that there might be a Bureau of Mines again in the US, which I think is a good idea. Is, how are we going to streamline permitting? How are we going to get all of these things going faster rather than just kind of hoping that we'll all just go into Indonesia and get nickel from there, or something of that nature?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question because I have something pulled up here. Sat down with Keith Newmeyer last week at the Rule Symposium, and I wanted to ask you about that. You already started answering the question. I'm going to play it's just over a minute here.
Perfect.
And then we can get your comments because it really does speak to what you just said.
So, a mining company, that's tough. You got to raise that money every single year, and you're at risk to the government. You don't know if you're going to get your permit. So it's all risk money. It's all speculative money. It's hard money to raise because, the people that are putting money into the mining company know that it's a long game. It's not, they're not going to get a return tomorrow. It might take 10 plus years, 20 years in some cases, to get a return on that money. So it's very tough money to raise. And the government, wants these metals to be taken out of the ground to go green, and the mining sector says, well, screw it. So what happens? Metal supplies dwindle. That's why you've seen silver supply in the mining sector be flat. It's been between 800 and 830 million ounces a year for the last 10 years, and it's not going up. There's no big silver mines coming on stream, and who's going to make the investment? There are silver mines around the world, which we know of, that are low grade, that have substantial ounces in them, but it's going to require $100 silver for those ounces to come out of the ground. And even if we hit $100 silver tomorrow, the mining companies still wouldn't make the investment because they would think, oh, geez, how long is it going to last? We need $100 silver for the next 30 years in order to pay back our investment that it's going to cost to build this mine. So
there you go, Andrew. Of course, that's in the face of, here we have Reuters reporting why climate change is leaving mining firms between a rock and a hard place. Demand for metals and minerals for the energy transition need to increase nearly 500% by 2050. Thoughts on that, and also what Keith said?
I mean, it's a huge disconnect. I mean, I bang my head against the wall looking at this all the time. I mean, I would know what I would do, but and I live in Canada where, it's very challenging, especially right now, dealing with the current government that's just not open to business. And that's problem number one. And then, of course, as Keith was saying, mining is a notoriously masochistic business. It's very challenging. And I'm not a big fan of government support in doing things, but since they're throwing trillions of dollars around, let's support the mining, sector if you can, which you can. I could even speaking to like larger funds. They'll say, hey, if you've got an industrial solar power plant in Indianapolis, wherever, I don't care, but it's backed by the government, yeah, we'll do that. And they don't care beyond that. And there are deals out there where they can go do massive, project financing that's going to be government backed. And why would you turn that around if you're a huge infrastructure play? And they're smart enough to know, well, no, we understand we need mining, but it's not really supported. We know that there's permitting issues, even in the best of areas. And we know we're going to run into all these climate people that at the same time, they say that climate change is necessary. We need these solutions. They either don't seem to realize that comes from mining, or they clearly do, and they just have other motives in mind. and there is this disconnect, and that disconnect leaves a lot of room for, I hate using the word conspiracies, but ideas to flourish. You go, are we really doing this, or is this just all BS? Like, all you want to do is fund a solar, industrial power plant, say here, or sorry, solar, grid, but you don't want to do any of the other stuff where that you need the supply of these materials. You don't want to do any of that part. You want to do hydrogen, but you don't want to drill. You don't want to do that. Like, so there is this huge disconnect between the reality of what we need. And that, I think, once again, comes down to, we need a lot more truth from media onwards down. And I think if people understood, like, listen, right from the top levels of companies and government, that we need this stuff, we need this mining, we need to get on board, we could pretty much all get on side with it. I think it's not that easy, but I think it would go a lot smoother. It just likens to that. I heard an interesting stat that, and this is specifically for nuclear power plants. Apparently, in the 70s, they could get a permit in a year. So you could get a plant up, like, that's, to me, I think that's incredible. That's amazing. There's no chance now. Now they might, scale it back because nuclear is growing in popularity, but that's where we should be. Like, we should be having like a blockchain. Here's a standard. This is the standard. You fit it, you get your permit, done. Like, it shouldn't be that more difficult than that. Bump, done. And if we are facing this like crisis that's going to destroy the entire planet, and that we're all in trouble, and that this, well, then a interesting flower in the desert, weed or whatever, a cacti that's only in Arizona, that's not really important, because it won't be there by 2050 either. So we have to solve this problem. And that's also the disconnect you don't see, is if we're facing this massive crisis, why aren't we doing these things? And it's tough on the brain to have to deal with these kind of counter signals.
I know what you mean, although perhaps we do have some good news, as I've shared this a couple of times before. You may have seen this, but we do have the U.S. Defense Department,
yes,
investing in Canadian critical minerals. 15 million has already been invested. It might not be the last. Officials expect announcements under the additional announcements under the more than $500 million U.S. program. So looking at strategic minerals, although at the same time, Keith and some of the other silver executives had that petition to have Canada list silver as a strategic metal. He said they also talked to the U.S., where they said that it was an oversight. They couldn't tell him whether they were going to list it, but didn't say, no, this shouldn't be listed. So as you were talking about before, it leaves an interesting environment. You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, and I keep thinking, let's say that the economy starts slowing down and the governments need to stimulate it. I keep thinking, well, because I hear people say if the markets slow down, the demand for solar could be lower. Okay, but what do you think if we had a recession? What do you think is the most likely way, at least on the fiscal side, that they would try and stimulate the economy? I'm guessing it would be similar to the Inflation Reduction Act, where you'd have a lot of money going into green energy. And then this one, again, is interesting because maybe I find things like this often go in steps. Now, I don't want to project too far out here, but it's ironic. You could actually have the governments, to meet the green agendas, governments printing money to put it into the mining sector and drive this whole thing. And I'm kind of giggling or maybe joking, although at least to meet those plans, it's kind of what you would need to happen. Because again, Keith was describing how most investors, they're chasing NVIDIA. They don't want a 10 or 20 year investment cycle. So any thoughts on all of that?
I mean, I love the fact that the US, I think they're looking at like 60 projects or whatnot. So they are looking at a lot, and they're giving grants, which, if you want to give a junior mining company a good solution, a grant, that's the best thing. It's dilutive, free money. It's amazing. So, I kind of was bashing over here, but I'll say that's amazing. If they can start applying a lot more of that money, that'd be great, because once again, there's no end to finding stuff, especially in Canada. We're a natural resource country. In my dreamland world, in my head, would be there's an acknowledgement from one of the ministers here in Canada called Champagne. He wrote the Critical Metals Act. He understands it. He gets it. Is that you would have this recognition by Canada that we could supply Canada, but mostly the US. The size of the industry in the US is obviously of a scale that Canada is not even close. Yeah. That there would be a natural chain of, hey, listen, if we fund this properly, we do it right, we could get the stuff out of the ground well, and we could do it like ESG. I don't like that term, but we could do it in an environmentally sound way with all the sorts of great procedures in place. No problem. And that would give a supply chain straight down to nuclear, battery, solar, whatever it is down in the States. That to me seems like a very obvious and not that difficult thing to do, since you've already printed all this money. And yes, the glamour wants to be in the chips, and the glamour wants to be in the big projects that are hot and whatnot, but you could drive a lot of interest very quickly and mobilize the country under a bit of a unity, saying, listen, we need to do this. And we'll be held accountable. There'll be bonds on the back end, for cleaning up, closing mines and whatnot. I don't know. I think it's pretty straightforward. Where it does get a little bit more difficult is, say, if you look at, say, like with the nuclear story, is they haven't built a nuclear power plant in a long time. So it's a lot of gray hair, like really gray hair guys out there that have to stick around to train crews up to say, if we want to do this nuclear thing, you're going to have to put in like 5 reactors a year. Like that's a lot. That's a lot of people you focused into school to get their degrees in engineering and nuclear engineering and all that. Never mind just actually building those compared to just housing. I mean, it's a very different build. So that stimulates the economy on a massive scale. So I think what I'm hoping is that some of these chip, money going into chips and whatnot in the States is, and then the gigafactories, is that they'll finally then say, we've got that started. We've spent a ton. Now let's spend some of the money, give it in grants, give it in this way to some of the miners, and get this supply chain straight to us. That's what I'm hoping. I don't know if that's the plan, but there is, like you said, lots of good in the fact that it's being recognized at a very executive high level, that it's not just being brushed across. Oh, it's critical. They know they need it. They want it. And, I think lots of big brains are trying to figure out what the best way, especially in the States. I have a lot more confidence in the States, putting something together at this point than the current government we have here in Canada.
That makes sense. And one other thing I wanted to share, we have not talked about this on the show yet, but Andrew, are you familiar with Bai Zhaojun, who writes some silver data from China each day on Twitter?
No, I'm not, but this should be interesting.
So he sent me a message, this was a couple of weeks ago, but ties in with what you're saying, and mentions Xi Jinping will visit Peru in November. This is the first time a Chinese leader has visited South America. The visit will ultimately determine the construction of a huge port in Peru to transport Peruvian minerals, raw minerals to China. Peru, obviously, they're the largest exporter of silver concentrate to China, third largest producer. China has directly established a silver concentrate supply chain from South America, losing an important silver ore resource for Europe and America. I'll call this speculation, I don't believe that he's making this up. We'll see. But just interesting that if accurate as presented, which I believe would be the case, you're seeing countries do that. I guess we're seeing the US do it as well. So it's starting to happen where we're seeing some of these relationships.
Yeah, I would expect China to do that. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, they've been building those kind of, ports all over the place. They've of course got the One Belt, One Road. They are, it's the Chinese Communist Party, but I kind of view them in a strange way. Yeah, they're communists, but they're also being very imperialistic in some interesting way as well. To be careful about, the politics of that. I think for them, they well understand the amount of material they need. And right now, that ties in with BRICS. They look attractive. They make the argument that, hey, the US comes in and threatens you with war. we're going to come in peaceful and we're going to build roads for you. We're going to give, I mean, so they're playing that card. Of course, we all know how real that card is. It's not terribly real. I think if you ask a lot of people in Africa how great it's worked out with them for the Chinese, it's not so great. A lot of people aren't terribly thrilled, but they not only have not first mover advantage, they've got a massive scale advantage of being throughout Africa. Why wouldn't you go into South America? And Peru, of course. I mean, they're already all over Argentina. They're looking for, lots of deals in lithium. They're going to want copper. They're going to want silver. And depending on the relationship they have with Mexico, I mean, they're extremely far left now again. We'll see with their mining laws if they're what's happening there as well. It's a good segue into Mexico.
Which actually was my next question. Just anything that, obviously we've seen the election, Claudia Sheinbaum getting ready to be sworn in soon enough. Anything that you've learned or ascertained from potential changes there?
I'm not very excited. I think it was Goldman Sachs has downgraded Mexico pretty heavily. She's pretty far left. The hope is that she's pragmatic. I don't know. I mean, the interesting thing with her is that her parents are open card-carrying communists, which is not helpful. They are also in the, what do you call it, the Panama Papers, which is also kind of funny and ironic that siphoning money off like a good communist would, using the system as they see fit. So there's that concern. And then there's rumors that she's going to go ahead with AMLO's mining thing, but that's against the Constitution. So we don't really know anything just yet. I think it's more like November. We'll have a better sense. Just like most things, we'll have a better sense in November what's happening. I think that in one way it makes the relationship with China pretty smooth. They might say, listen, we need a lot more of your silver. We need you to do certain things. And they're a great trading partner. You're probably going to do it. I mean, I would say that China fully understands that they need, especially like on the solar panel front. I mean, my Lord, the amount that they build is shocking.
Yeah, well, certainly a lot of change in the air between the Mexican election, upcoming US election, and perhaps the last one I'll run by you before we wrap up here today. Of course, we have the Fed increasingly getting ready to cut interest rates, it appears, up to 98% of at least a quarter point cut by September. You see even 13% chance of us being 2 quarter point cuts lower by then. And Citigroup had a note out last week. They expected to cut the next 7 consecutive meetings after that. Futures curve, maybe not showing a cut at each single meeting, but not far off. So all this going to be happening in what increasingly looks like a lower rate environment.
I think there has to be lower rates. I mean, like we touched on the cost of, well, everything, but just, even on the mining scale, the costs are huge. Like now you think about these people building these gigafactories, thinking about it, and their model from a couple of years ago say, oh, this is what's going to cost. Now that's being blown out of proportion now. It's huge. Now a lot of them have the backing of the government. So, okay, they're okay. But I mean, the average person is feeling this on a huge level. In Canada, it's devastating. It's huge. They've already started. They did a quarter point. The US is a bit more challenging because once again, if they do anything right before the election, that'll bring up some issues. But you have to, like, you're going to have to do something soon because this can't go on. Never mind just with the mounting debt. This kind of, it's punitive. It's really, really tough. And it's frustrating because you kind of get beat up in the media because it sounds like, oh, everything's amazing. The economy is great. Everyone's doing so well. Everyone's so happy. And it's like, no, that 0.01% is thrilled. They've created more billionaires than ever. But almost everyone else, whether you're middle to high income, is hurting. And that's not the solution. It isn't great that just a whole bunch of AI chip companies, which are buying each other and huge cash flows, are doing well. We have to have an overall economy and market where all of the parts are moving in unison if you want actual real growth rather than one surging and the rest all lagging and kind of flat. So my hope is that after the election, whoever wins, then they go, okay, that's over. We're not acting out of politics. We can't be blamed either side. Boom, we start rate cutting. That's the hope. But I mean, we live in such a strange time that to try to predict anything right now it's a fool's errand most of the time. But now it's not a good idea at all, because who knows? I mean, just because something makes sense, its value, it's fundamental, it seems reasonable or rational, that is no guarantee of any decision at this point.
I know what you mean. I think about it sometimes where, let's say someone was trying to plan their retirement we see countries looking a lot at currency reform. You and I talked about the progression of the unit, which, again, is it implemented successfully today? No. So we don't know what happens in between here and there, but a lot of steps like that, let alone what inflation is, let alone how AI changes the world. It's a hard time to plan, certainly. And then, of course, add on top of that the election. Yet in our favor, though, we do have you, Andrew, and folks like you. And perhaps you could just let people know where they can get access to your research, because obviously you're keeping close track of these things on the mining side as well, and helping people just navigate some of the changes that are coming our way. And perhaps you could let them know where they can find you with the Market Mindset.
Yeah, so check us out at the marketmindset.ca, as well as on YouTube. And we're mostly kind of energy and mining based, but a lot of the conversations we like to have, like with you and with hedge fund managers and whatnot, is getting what their thoughts are on the overall macro and when things are going to shift and how things are looking. And like I said, there's lots to talk about, and I think that currency one, is the most interesting, because when all this first started, my first thought was, yeah, they're gonna, if you were gonna spend money like this, just whimsically, just print it. And that's Canada, that's the US, like most of these countries, you would do that if you thought, well, we're going to have a solution on the back end, so why don't we just spend this stuff? So part of my brain goes back to, yeah, there maybe behind the scenes, there's something in the US as well that's brewing, that's going to be a new currency, a new this. I know they've got the Fed coin idea out there, the white paper, but maybe something's coming a lot sooner than later. So trying to keep up with all of these things, it matters. Even if you look at me and say, well, you follow a lot of junior miners, you have to know that all of this stuff, because it all ties together, especially nowadays, more than any other time before.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I'm glad that we have people like you out there who have a commitment to finding the truth and how to really apply a good plan to navigating some of these things. So you can find more about Andrew and the Market Mindset at themarketmindset.ca. Link also in the description field below. And that said, Andrew, we'll wrap up for today, but great catching up with you as always. We need to do this more often, and I'll make sure that happens, but a lot of fun talking. And I think it's one of those things where we don't know the timing, but it sure seems like there will be a day where people will be looking back and say, how come no one saw this? Similar to the mortgages, how come no one saw what was happening in advance? And I like to think hopefully this is helpful for people in planning and navigating the future. So great to see you again. You take good care of yourself, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks so much, Chris. I really appreciate your time. Take care.